Harvard S. Heath is the former curator of the Utah and American West Archives at the Harold B. Lee Library. I guess you all know where that is, at BYU, where he earned his PhD. Somebody asked me tonight why I decided to go to BYU when I was young, and I couldn't quite understand, but I am a grad of the Y, so Harvard, you've got another fan here at least.
Two of us.
Two of us. He's editor of In the World, the Diaries of Reed Smoot, which now this book is part of the Significant Mormon Diaries series from Signature Books, who's the publisher of many of these, and we have several of these books that used to be as much as $125, some of them at astoundingly low sale prices. This one that Harvard edited of Reed Smoot is $79.99. It was formerly about $100. We have some of those copies for you. And then, of course, tonight he's talking to us about Confidence Amid Change, the Presidential Diaries of David O. McKay. And this is in the new Legacy series. So while $60 may seem like a lot compared to the last series from Signature, because they were limited and fine bindings and so on, these are half the price, and they're still very nicely produced. So we highly recommend any of these in the series, and this is the latest one. He was one of the researchers for President Ernest L. Wilkinson's 4-volume Brigham Young University, the first 100 years. I was reading the copy that we sent out to you about tonight, and I saw that it said, charismatic and a polished public speaker, and I thought, wait, is this talking about Harvard? And it was David O. McKay, but hey, but he is. He's not bad. No, I've known, we were trying to determine how long we've known each other. I think Harvard and I met probably about when I started Benchmark Books, so it's been over 30 years ago. I've always admired him for his scholarship, his depth and breadth of knowledge in things Mormon and Utah. He wouldn't want me to say this, but I kind of look at him as a walking encyclopedia. He knows, he's forgotten more than I've ever learned about a lot of topics. Wait, well, that's exactly the way you wrote it. Reading verbatim. You can't win. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Harvard Heath.
Is that going to work without that?
It will. I think it will. Stick that in your pocket. Then we'll put this up here. So wherever you want it. And we're going to try this. Just give it a test.
Can you hear me back there?
Is that okay?
We're good to go.
All right.
So you give me the high sign when 20 minutes is up so that we can go to Q&A?
Sure. Sure.
More of you is better than a lot of me, so we'll save time for that. Let me just give you a little background. Part of it's an introduction, but part of it is not there about my long association with the McKay Diaries. As with many of us in our professions, a lot happens with serendipity and fate. And I look back on my life, and both those are true. As a young student at BYU, undergraduate, I had a couple of professors who thought a lot of me, and tried to push me into doing things. And there came a time when they were going to do the BYU history, and they had hired 2 graduate students. And so I was approached by 2 of these professors. One of them I'll mention because he's passed on, Marvin Hill. And they tried to force the committee in Wilkeston to hire me. And I was not a graduate student, so they fought that. And so I thought I wouldn't get that opportunity, but they hired me. And that started a long odyssey with President McKay. At the time that happened, this was kind of the start of the years of Camelot. And those of you who read Gary's wonderful 3-volume work on Arrington realized how that got started. And I came in as a researcher in about 72, was about the time that Leonard started as church historian. And most of you know the history, so I won't elaborate. The archives were a closed proposition. And as we were asked to go up to do research there by President Wilkinson, we had a meeting after 2 months, report of what we've done, and we brought back the report, and he came in livid and says, we're spending good money, you've got nothing to show. You have a list of things you were going to look at for sources, and you have nothing here reproduced. What are you guys doing in Salt Lake every day? And I said, we're up there getting no's from the staff that it's all restricted. We can't get into them. Well, I can't believe that. I'll take care of that. I'll make a call to Salt Lake. And those of you who know Ernest Wilkinson, he thought he could pretty much dominate everybody. And for many people, he did dominate them. So he calls up and comes back to us next week and says, they turned me down. You know what it is? It's Harold B. Lee. He doesn't like me. He says, but we'll get those eventually. And I says, how are we going to do that? He says, he might not be around forever. He dies 4 months later. So he says, I will try again. So he called up the first president and got hold of President Tanner. He says, you should have those. I'll make a call over there and take care of that. Well, at the time, those remember, I see Jeff Johnson here from the old days. Lawrence Peterson, bless his heart, was a fine gentleman, but very angry about what had happened with the church history department, him being bypassed. And he wouldn't let us see stuff. When he got the word he had to let us see these our materials, he was really angry and would always say, you should see this stuff. So you threw him on the desk. So as we got closer to Wilkinson's era, we saw there was a David L. McKay diary. Can we get to see that? And at first they said, no, there's no way you're going to see that. So Wilkinson made a call again to Salt Lake, and word came back through channels. We don't know who they were, but it came back, and we were given access to the McKay diary. I thought I had just gone in nirvana. I mean, I couldn't believe how good they were. But I was caught in a bind because I was being paid to do BYU research. I wasn't supposed to take notes or spend time reading it all, but I couldn't help it. But I did stay true. Well, my integrity was partially compromised when I came across the Mormon Doctrine entry, which I, at lunch hour, made a photocopy of and took home. That was my only discretion. I made a copy of that. But I thought at the time that these were working great in Salt Lake with Leonard Darrington and all this new research being done, that I can always come back to the McKay Diaries, so I just made a few notes to come back when I was able to do some graduate work. And as you all know, by 1982, it was gone. The days of Camelot were gone. And I thought, I'll never see him again. And then at one point, I guess I can tell this story too. I'll probably never be told anywhere else. It has to do with this in a way. I was doing my graduate work at BYU, and there had been a recent eruption between Elder Packer and Mike Quinn over his article in BYU Studies, and Mike's response to it on being a Mormon historian. So I got a call from President Holland, Elder Holland, at the time was president of BYU, and said, you've been recommended as the authority on BYU history. We're trying to kind of bridge some problems here. We have invited him to come and give a convocation speech, and he wants you to help him research, or somebody research BYU history for him so we can know what to talk about. So as I went to Elder Packer's office, I announced who I was. He says, are you an historian? I says, well, I'm aspiring to be one. Are you one of those? I said, excuse me, what does that mean, one of those? You know what I mean, one of those. I says, well, you have to be more specific. You know, guys down at BYU in the history department, poli sci, the ones that are causing all the trouble. I says, I have had classes with most of those people, and I think they're pretty good men. Well, okay. So next meeting we had, I said, now when you say one of those, who are you referring to? And he said, well, one of those profs, Gene England, gave a very nasty talk about Brigham Young at Weber State. And I says, oh, did you get a copy of that? No, but I have a cousin whose best friend went there and heard it. So I thought, well, that's probably not too reliable. So then when we got through the project, make a long story short, I says, well, he said, thank you for what you've done for me. What can I do for you? I said, well, you know, when I finish up here, I'm doing a dissertation, and I would like to maybe get access to a couple of church records that I've already seen before. I told him what they were, and he said, well, I don't see a problem with that. When we get through, give me a call back. So I called him back. He said, what were we talking about? I said, well, you know, the access to papers. So what would you want to see? I said, well, I'd like to see some stuff from the first presidency that I saw earlier and McKay. He said, well, yeah, it's no problem. Just call up the department, make an appointment, and go see them. I says, I have, and they won't. That's why I'm seeing you. Oh, well, I guess we should just stay in channels and leave it at that. So I thought, well, I'll never see McKay Diaries ever again. And then 20 years later, I hear that Greg Prince is doing a study on President McKay, and so my first question was, how is he doing McKay without the diaries? As it turns out, William Wright, Bob Wright, was called as a mission president in Washington, D.C. North Mission, and it had to be in Greg's ward. And they got talking, and he was talking about McKay, and he mentioned that he was the nephew of Claire Middlemiss, and he had access to a lot of her papers and a copy of the diaries. So this made Greg's work, most of you read it, a very nice history of President McKay's administration. So I was brash enough to call up Prince and say, hey, could I have access to those and approach Wright for a diary project? He said, well, I'm all for it. He said, you better hurry, because Bob is having some issues with his memory, and you probably ought to go as soon as possible. I'll support you in that. So I went to Bob Wright's home, and he was, I think, in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and he was anxious, and but he said, I'm not sure we need to have two things done, because we have this biography we're doing, and that should suffice. Why do you want to have a diary editing? And for those of you who know Prince's biography on Arrington, why did Gary Bajira edit the diaries when Prince already had the biography out with all kinds of diary citations? It's because Gary's book is so much more enlightening and more comprehensive than anything Greg could do. And so I tried to give him the same argument, and he finally bought into it, but he was hesitant, and the family were concerned about me, I guess, and doing this, and I hope there's nobody here from the family, because I don't want to cast any aspersions. They were a great bunch of people. As you know, Bob was at one time ran for governor in 1980, and he was a senior partner in one of the biggest law firms in Salt Lake. Very nice man, but he began to doubt after I talked with Gary about it in Gary's office with them about doing this. So I decided at that time that what I should do for my sake and for the sake of history in general, that I should try and talk him into giving those papers to somebody soon. And at the time I was still employed at BYU, but I really felt that this needed to go to the U. So I approached Greg Thompson at the U and says, would you be interested in having a copy of the McKay Diaries and some papers? He says, oh, no. Well, I'll take you out to dinner every night. Just how can I help? So I met with Bob Wright, and he seemed kind of excited about that. And we met with Greg Thompson a couple of times. And then he said, well, you know, I'm going to have a problem. I can't just give this. I've got to have a decent tax appraisal. I'm not going to pay $4,000 or $5,000 to have this appraised. I said, well, let me talk to Kurt Bench about that. And so I've been appointed to come here to have Kurt Bench meet with him. And Kurt, in a very magnanimous manner, said, I won't charge you for it. This is too important. And he says, that does it. We'll put him at the U. So, Kurt, you're responsible for this. So then, that was my short history of how I came by McKay Diaries. And I want to take just a few minutes to talk about diaries themselves. First of all, as you know, the volume is about, 800 and some pages, Ron? And you know it's an abridgment, which means a lot's been left out, which you just can't do. Gary Bergera's wonderful volume on up here you see the 3 volumes on Arrington. That's great. It's all there. But with McKay, it can't be all there. I did do one thing. When I should mention, when I got the diaries put at the U, Gary Bergera was wonderful to me. He says, listen, Harvard, when you get them to the U, ask them for permission to take them from their archives to my office, and we can make photocopies for you to use. So I owe Gary for that wonderful thing he gave me to get those done. And what they looked like, I kept one volume. They were all like this. I kept one of the originals. All the McKay diaries kept by McKay and Middlemiss were just like this, these black volumes. And there's a picture, I think, in Prince's book on the shelves there. Okay, so I have here, the one I saved was McKay Diaries, last time. January to March, 1966. I had my daughter count these. There's 300 pages for 4 months in 66. And my book only is 800 pages, so you can tell how much we couldn't do. And to be fair, a lot of the volumes, like here you'll see, Clara Middlemiss photocopied every article that came out in the newspaper or magazine about President McKay, and any letters that happened to be apropos to an appointment. And those were put in here. So it's larger in many ways because of these additions by her. But still, we see that this is really an abridgment. So the question arises, how balanced is this book on McKay? If you read this, is this a well-rounded picture of who he was? Did you emphasize this and not this? And the answer is yes, but I tried to, in my introduction, explain to you the issues with this, and I hope that it's going to suffice. I tried to take the economic, the social, the theological, the doctrinal, the political, and take excerpts from his diaries that reflects, I think, the important issues that he raised in his diary. And the problem with that is, as you can see, if I had 300 pages here for 3 months, and I was going to look if I forgot to in a book what 1 year, I think that around we had between 50 and 70 pages for each year. And so in those years, it's obvious that's going to be a small representation. The next problem comes with chapter headings. And Signature is very anxious to have chapter titles, and I can see the reason for that. But it was hard for me because when I give a chapter title, one assumes that was the major issue of the year, what was important. And they were major issues and they were important, but for example, one chapter that I know is going to cause some concerns for readers of the Utah right persuasion is Benson and Birchism. Now, that was the central issue of that year, but that was one of 100 different issues that were discussed that year. But it was important enough that I felt I had to give a title for that because that's what the excerpts I had were about. And other ones have the same problem. So I'm hoping that you'll see that this is as balanced as I can get. And the criticism I'll get is not putting this in and not taking some stuff out. But I can always have an excuse if it's an abridgment, so it's really not my fault. I did the best I could. So that's the problem with the abridgment as opposed to Gary's wonderful 3-volume, is that you have to assume that what you're putting in there is representative of the man. And I think it kind of is. So I hope it is. So I'm going to stop with that and let some Q&A occur because that's probably where most of the important stuff will be done tonight. So questions? Yes?
I've noticed underlining in the books in several of the entries. Were those your underlinings or did McKay?
Let me repeat the question. She's asking in the book, she notices some things are underlined. Was that mine or my editor or was that McKay or Middlemiss? It was McKay and Middlemiss. And those were things she felt was important. I should, before someone asks this question, I'll answer it in advance. how much of this is Clara Middlemiss and how much of this is President McKay? He dictated this to her. And so the question some people have is, can we rely on what's there? Is that McKay's exact words? Is it paraphrased? Did she ad-lib a little bit here and there? The answer is we just don't know. But we assume that most of it was President McKay. And I wish we knew if he had a chance to go back and review it. I'm sure he did, but as the years went on and he was in poor health, I'm sure she took some liberties to put these in there. But I can't say for sure. And so some people are going to doubt maybe that, well, maybe he didn't really say it that way. But I'm fairly convinced after seeing correspondence and other things that she probably got it pretty much the way he said it. She might have, I'm not sure if she cleaned up any grammatical errors or other problems. We'll never know about that. But and I will admit, in the later years when he was ill, you will find in the end the book where she, in some days, takes Alvin Dyer's diary and puts it in there for two reasons. Three reasons. One, he was President McKay's counselor. Two, it was an account of the events. And three, that was second cousin of Claire Middlemiss, Alvin Dyer. So those are reasons why that was included in there. So I'll allow Dave to need to answer that question. Other questions?
I got one.
Kurt?
Do you want to comment on the entire McKay Diaries project, or I'm not sure where we are, if you even want to talk about it.
Well, I'm supposed to do a complete McKay Diary project. I hope that I'll get to that, or I'm working on that, but there's some issues there I want to resolve first, so I'll leave it at that for right now.
What was the question?
Yeah, what, excuse me?
What was the question?
Oh, just about future projects with McKay. I just mentioned I'm supposed to do a full text biography of President McKay, and we'll see how that goes. Yes, in the back.
Just a question like on kind of the spiritual aspect, like spiritual experiences, that kind of thing. Did you see, more kind of later on in his administration or at the beginning? And then were there parts that, they had told you, hey, don't even mention this, or, this is kind of, we're going to redact this portion, or?
Now, who's they?
Well, when you're reviewing it, were there like, okay, these pages don't talk about it?
Okay, the questions I understand to be is, did President McKay have more spiritual experiences in his early administration or more later? And was some things redacted by?
The first presidency, or?
Yeah. I don't think they were redacted. And to your question about the spiritual aspect of President McKay, he was always had that spiritual component in him. Those of you who have read Jerry Rubin Clark's bio by Mike Quinn know there were two different personalities. President McKay was kind of charismatic and intuitive. Clark was pragmatic and rational and didn't put much stock in a lot of spiritual experiences that were overdone. And President McKay was the opposite, but he also had a sense that there is a line where you don't get too involved in making assertions that are unreasonable or are too sacred for anybody to see. Just keep it to yourself. And he did talk a lot about that in his diary, except he did sometimes to the core members talk about an experience he had or what he felt impressed to do. So I think that as he got older, his decline in health caused him to be somewhat concerned about what he should say and do. In fact, one interesting entry, which I always found kind of tragic, was that he, when he became ill after a mini stroke, felt that he could not anymore be the Lord's mouthpiece because he was so ill. And so he said one time in his diary, if I can't be healed and made whole, then please take me. I'm no use to you as a prophet. So, and he got worried later on in his administration that he was not able to ferret out things rationally. And so he asked people like Clara Middlemiss, Alvin Dyer, to pay close attention to what was going on in case he missed something. So I think his diminished health caused some tailing off of his spiritual things he put in his diary. Yes?
Did you have access to his contemporaries' documents or records, President Benson, President Brown, or other contemporaries of his?
The question was, did I have access to documents for President Brown or President Benson? Is that right? No, I mean, I consulted the biography of Hugh B. Brown that was done years ago, and I know there was a Benson diary because Mike Quinn cited it, but as far as I know, Gary, it's not available for research, right, at the Church Archive, so that I couldn't do. I'm not sure what Matt Harris is doing with that in his bio, but that would have been helpful. I was able to glean a few things from Mike Quinn's research at Yale that I used in certain footnotes, but no, I didn't have access to those documents. Yes?
I'm sort of interested in how yours compares with the book by Prince and Wright. Did you have more material to work with, or less, or the same? Did you have the minutes from the first presidency that it's referred to in that book? Or
The question is, did I have more access to documents than Greg Prince had when he did his book on McKay? The answer is I had less. Greg is a pretty smart researcher. He goes out early on when he gets an assignment and does a number of oral histories. And he did a number of oral histories with various general authorities and close friends of who remember President McKay. And he consulted other things. My exposure was McKay papers at the U, which contained some things, but his correspondence was not available. There was some correspondence in the middle of this, but the complete correspondence is in the church archives, and I was not able to access that. Question here?
I have a letter sent out by President McKay and Clark to a stake president in west part of the valley here, instructions that they should not go out and buy an organ because they had a special person to buy the organ from. So they're doing hands-on instructions even to stake presidents where to buy an organ, how to do this. At what point did the church get big enough they didn't have to be hands-on?
The question was, he has in his possession a letter from President McKay and President Brown, was it?
Clark. is
Clark.
Two of the signatures.
A letter to a stake president in West Valley who was going to buy an organ and was told by them that they had a person they knew that would take care of that for them.
Yeah.
So the question was, at what point in time did the church begin to be more fair and equitable in buying and purchasing? And
Big enough so it didn't have to be hands-on.
well, I'm sure it still goes on a little bit. I know that at BYU, President Wilkinson was told he had to buy the tables for the Harold B. Library from a certain vendor who was a nephew of one of the general authorities, which they did. And it was so cheap that after about a year and a half, the veneer started to peel back. And Wilkinson was very unhappy about that. So I know that there were contacts in the 60s and 70s. I'm not sure when that ended, where there was a little more. I think now it's pretty much, well, you got to admit that Jacobson sure gets a lot of contracts for church buildings and others, so I'm not sure how that goes. Yeah.
Was there anything that surprised you?
Yeah. You mean then, or as I worked on, when I first saw him, or now?
Now.
No, I was surprised early on. I was kind of naive about contemporary Mormon history. I didn't realize, I knew there were politics, but I didn't know it was that bad. But now, after being decades into church history, I'm not surprised anymore about anything. But yeah, I guess that, Gary, I did, I was surprised, I guess, that he was not able to do things he wanted to do. I think that had he had his health, a lot of things that were accomplished by later presidents, Kimball, he might have done. I think that was my biggest surprise. Is I realized what his aspirations were what he felt about certain things, and he just didn't have the two things: his health and the money was not there to do what he was. So that kind of surprised me because I thought that those would be things that could be overcome through other matters, other ways. Ron.
I thought the Marquis Peterson editorial was interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Could you comment?
Those of you who want to read that, it's very interesting. And I have to admit, this is not. I was lucky to come across. I think it was Sterling Adams, who I talked with years ago, and he was doing something on Mormon doctrine, and I come across this. And what Ron's referring to, the question was a footnote I have on Marquis Peterson. When Mormon doctrine came out, well, I'll let you read it. They got to buy the book, right?
Yeah, they gotta buy it.
But the Mormon doctrine issue, and Marquis Peterson, who, as we know, was a rather arch conservative, and so it's funny that he was so upset by what he saw in the Mormon doctrine. I should mention, trip to memory here. When you get old like me, I can ramble. Back in '66, I was at a conference with my dad, and we were just checked out of Hotel Utah and grabbed a bite to eat in the downstairs coffee shop, and there was Marquis Peterson sitting there. So Dad says, "Hey, let's go and sit down and talk to him." So we did, and we got talking. I said, "Well, what are some of the challenges you have?" Elder Peterson, "Well, I'm in charge of a committee that have to deal with kind of dissidents. I wish we could burn all the journal discourses. They caused me more trouble with people, and I just wish we could get rid of it. That's half my problems. People read that and come here and give us grief." But Peterson realized that doctrine can be problematic. So this thing that he's referring to, he wrote an editorial for the Improvement Era that never got published, unfortunately, where he cited there are some people in America who write things and they don't document them, and they're erroneous and they mislead us. And in the church we have people like that as well. For example, Bruce Harmon-Conkey with Mormon Doctrine, and the other one was with Milton R. Hunter on Book of Mormon Archaeology. Those are personal opinions and should not be taken as church positions. That was never published, but it was written by Marquis Peterson. I think it was found in the J. Reuben Clark papers, as I recall. Yes.
In your investigation, were you able to explain why David O. McKay was such a warm, humane person, yet on the other hand, he was such a hardcore racist? He, felt like blacks were inferior.
Somehow I knew that question was going to get asked tonight. I knew. I was expecting that question. Did you hear that in the back? Okay. I'm going to give that a longer answer than I probably should. You're right. President McKay was warm and tolerant and Christ-like. I mean, I think of all the people I've read about, he impressed me the most. So your question is, how can a man that has no sensitivities be so callous towards race? And let me just say that I regret that many people, young people, have this trap they fall into when it comes to history of presentism. They feel they have to interlay the present with the past, and therefore they should have known better. Why do they act like this? Whether it's George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt, there's always somebody who didn't measure up to our current enlightened standards. And President McKay was bothered by that. But let me just give you a little bit of insight into his background. He was born in 1873, okay? So by 1920s, he was in his 50s. At that time in American culture, the big selling book was called American Negro Slavery by Ulrich Phillips. And he took the position, which was accepted all through the universities and culture in America, that slavery was bad, but not really that bad, because it helped these poor African Americans have a structure, a home, food, and work. And by the way, he said, there was not much money made in plantations, so, this is the way it is. So for 20 years, people accept the fact, yeah, it was paternalistic, that the black culture needed white domination for their own sake. You think, that is really stupid. But Phillips was a recognized scholar, and that particular persuasion of history maintained itself for 3 decades. Some people dissented, but not many. In 1956, Kenneth Stamp wrote a book called The Peculiar Institution, which changed everything. He took the same source material that Phillips used and said just the opposite. They were enslaved, they were beaten down, they did make a profit. So here's President McKay raised in his culture where he sees academically and culturally these views prevail. You say, well, yeah, but he should have known better. After all, he's supposed to be inspired, right? So why doesn't he get this? And I have to say, do we get it? In 20 years, 30 years, our grandparents can say, geez, Grandpa, you are really out of it. How Neanderthal your thought was about that. Come on, couldn't you see that? But you say, well, this is about race, though. This is about individuals. And I agree that it bothers me, but President McKay was bothered by it. And you read the diary where it concerned him. And he made every possible effort to get away from the strong stance of Joseph Fielding Smith about one drop of blood. And he made some interesting changes in South Africa when he took over as president. And in his discussions with Lowell Benyon, he tried to push as far as he could. And at one time, you read in the diary where he said, I've implored the Lord and I would like to change it, but I can't. And then in one meeting with the Quorum of the 12, he said, this is not doctrine, it's policy. But that never got out, and people assumed that it was doctrine and policy because the ones that talked the loudest and wrote the most books were Joseph Fielding Smith and McConkie, which did justify it. And so racism, I give him a pass on that because do we expect people to get outside their culture? Really?
You know, he had important intellectuals telling him how wrong it was too.
Yeah.
Like Lowry Nelson.
Yeah,
and
Lowry
Chauncey
Nelson, yeah,
Harris
and Sterling McMurrin.
and Sterling McMurrin.
Yeah, and to us it seems so matter of fact. Geez, that's so obvious.
You know, Lowry Nelson went through all that, but he didn't pick up that racism.
Well, Lowry Nelson, academicians usually go with the flow. And Lowry Nelson was a sociologist. And for those of you who don't know, it's a long answer. In 1940s, he heard from a good friend who was the bishop president of the Southern States that we weren't proselyting African Americans. And he couldn't believe that. He hadn't heard that before. So he wrote the church and asked for clarification. And got a letter back to the first presidency in 1948, I believe it was, and says, this is our policy. He went ballistic and sent the letter to the Nation magazine, and that's where it blew up. And so, yeah, academicians all, I think, accept it when the climate changes. But you couldn't find too many people in the 1930s who had that enlightened view of African Americans. And even, you recall in 48 when the Democrats adopted a platform, Dixie, how the South revolted. And Lyndon Johnson had to twist arms to get the civil rights passed. And culture changes slowly. And you're thinking about President McKay, who's by this time in his 80s. He should have, but he didn't, and I can understand his trepidation with that. And then you'll find other quotes in there where he says, one of them that other would see as racist, where he said in a letter to a state president, we don't believe in intermarriage. We believe that Asians marry Asians, and Mexican Americans marry Mexican Americans. And these were cultural things that not just Mormons believed. Protestant culture believed it. And so to go against the cultural times, it's not right, but bright stars in the academic world also can give bad advice, and they can have wrong positions. But in the case your point is correct. There are a number of scholars who pointed that out. And I think that deep down, some of the brethren had concerns. I have a person in my ward who's a granddaughter of Charles Callis, who was a bishop president for 30 years in the South. And she tells the story of there was a meeting held in 1936 where her grandfather, Joseph Fielding Smith, and one other general authority, had a meeting about the priests and the blacks. And they sent back a vote to the brethren 2-1 against maintaining the policy. And her grandpa, Callis, was the one that voted against that. He saw it firsthand. My father was a missionary in the South in the 1930s. He saw all the racism down there, even among the saints, the culture. And I have to admit, I'm old enough to have said some, in high school, made some jokes that are really inappropriate. In fact, this last weekend we had some friends come in from my high school, going through our yearbook, and found our student body president, picture of him in blackface for the school assembly. Was he racist? We racist at the high school for allowing and laughing at that? No, but it looks bad, and it is bad. So I don't think we can lay all the blame on President McKay and those like him. Now that it's so obvious that it was a Brigham Young thing that was carried on, but at the time, it's hard. And one of the things in the book I'd like to emphasize is these were hard decisions. That's why the book entitled Comms Amid Change. President McKay wanted to maintain the comms he had in the church and the institution, but he had this change, and it was hard to deal with change. And even President Kimball, in his book, talks about he laid the groundwork for the revelation by doing research, and when he importuned the Lord for revelation, this was years in the making. He consulted a number of the brethren and took it to them first. So these cultural changes happen slowly, and I know it appears he's racist, but I don't see President McKay as a racist. If he was racist, I was a racist as a young man. I said and did things I'm ashamed of, making jokes about people of color, and that was inappropriate, but it was part of the culture, and I'm sorry that I succumbed to it.
How would it have fractured?
Well, he's a prophet. Shouldn't he have risen above that?
That's always the question. Well, if that's the case, I want to know any case in biblical history where prophets have been infallible. I mean, Peter is the great apostle. He could get it right on Gentiles. Why couldn't Peter get that? It's so obvious that this was not just for the Jews, it's for the Gentiles. So why couldn't Peter get it? Is he that dense not realize this is with the Lord's program? So I don't subscribe to the infallibility of prophets. I think that's a dangerous position.
I didn't say he was a...
No, I'm just saying that as a prophet, he should know better. And even today we have those cross currents of that. And the comment here was, would that have fractured the church? It might have. The church was a very conservative culture, and it still is. So all these he's kind of weigh in. I'm not sure I give you a good answer, but I agree with you that it is disturbing, but I don't look upon President McKay as a racist, because I see too many other parts of his life where he was trying to do the Christ-like thing. So this is a difficult situation. Yes?
Could you confirm or disconfirm some of my old Mormon rumors that he was an arbiter? He arbitrated between Joseph Fielding Smith, Man, Origin, Destiny, and he had Talmage come in and talk to him, and he took a neutral position. He also was arbiter when J. Reuben died. He called U.B. Brown, which is a Democrat, and he noticed famously supposed to have said, and can you confirm this? He said, "I will not preside over the dissolution of the Mormon Church." And so, meaning that's why he wanted to have, he knew that he was a Republican, he wanted to have two Democrat counselors in Tanner and Brown. I don't know, is that true or wrong, or that's just a good old Mormon rumor.
Did you cast that back in the back there? First of all, I'm going to ask you one question before I get to that one about President McKay. He was enlightened, and he was the best of the best. If we think that he was conservative, we're miscasting him. There were a number of people that were really conservative, and during his tenure as apostle of the 20s was kind of the golden age to me of the church. He had the Whitsells and the Talmages and the B.H. Roberts and the McKays and the Adam S. Binions, progressive, more liberal people. So President McKay is a conservative, but he's also liberal in many of his approaches, and it bothered Clark a lot, and it bothered other people that he was too liberal. As to the position of politics, he was very sensitive to that. He was an arch conservative, but he saw what would happen if he began to tipped the scales for the Republicans. And so people like to look back and say you had Brown and you had Moyle and you had Tanner, who were Democrats, and he was very conscious of political identity. And the church today still is, although we're so right-wing in Utah that it doesn't make much difference what the brethren say. But we do have a sense in President McKay that he wanted to remain neutral and not tip the scales either way. And he was able to amend his positions. For example, he disliked Harry Truman a lot because he was a Democrat. But he met him one time and thought, he's not a bad guy. And he despised John F. Kennedy and was all for Nixon. But when Kennedy asked for a visit in Salt Lake, he says, he's a pretty good guy. I didn't realize he was that type of person. Very nice man. And then, to me, the real irony is President McKay and President Lyndon Johnson. I mean, can you find two people more different than those two? And yet, you'll find in the diary, the President Johnson loved the man. He actually called to Washington at his expense to get counsel on what he should do with the nation. He was perturbed about what was going on in the nation. He wanted some advice from President McKay. Eisenhower invited him back to a stag party in the White House early on his. Can you imagine? Oh, I was going to say President Nelson went to a stag party with Trump, but that's not. So he was well liked by the presidents, and he would say, Lyndon Johnson's a liberal, but I like what he's doing. I think he's a good man. So he was able to bridge that, although he was caught up in that, as you all know, the famous story of the 1896 demarcation made in each ward in the church. This half's Democrat, this half's Republican. Well, Huntsville had two sides of the chapel, and Gun McKay was on the wrong side, and President McKay was on the right side. Okay, so he became a Republican, and Gun McKay became a long-term Democrat in the House for Utah. So again, back to your question about President McKay and his racism. He was conservative by nature, but I think that he did all to be expected. And this is a guy who was really a man of the 19th century. He was 27 at the turn of the century, and to overcome all the cultural biases that he did see and be who he was, I think it's remarkable. Is it enough? Not by our standards, but we can't get too involved with presentism. It's just not good to impose us on the past and think, why can they do better? And we're always going to have these problems with shoulda, coulda, woulda, but that's life. Yes?
I was very impressed when I read the Prince book because it's made church leaders look like real people making real decisions in real life and in a certain culture. And I hope that that's what your book does too, and I wish we could somehow convey that message to so many members that I know who think these people are not real people, not making sort of real decisions. They're all up there with a halo, and we just don't get a real picture. And I wish maybe you could tell us how we can convey that.
Well, the issue is, if you go back and read conference talks and hear people, the brother talk about it, they do say that, but no one believes it. No one wants to believe it. I mean, Elder Ruchtdorf, Elder Holland, Elder Christofferson, Elder Ballard have all come out in the last few years and said, we made mistakes. Leaders have problems. But no one wants to believe that because, on the other hand, you hear just the opposite of follow the prophet, and almost this infallibility creeps into us. And so I'm not sure how you solve that problem, because we're told that, but no one wants to believe it. And maybe it's because the other attempts to state the other position overpower that. But it's out there, but no one wants to believe it. I don't want to comment on that. That's my perception of it. But you're right. This book and the Prince book show that they are real human beings that have issues and problems. And part of this book shows the issues that President McKay dealt with, whether it's economic, religious, political, or social. And again, President McKay, for being a conservative, he took on President Benson in a way that was kind of courageous when the culture in the church was, How many of your parents were Birchers? Yeah, I mean, in the 60s, that was the thing to do. It was almost looked upon as part of the priesthood, you know, the Birch Society. And he fought that in a way that, had he not fought it, we could have been in a lot more trouble than we are today with the right-wing problems in the church. So he was courageous in doing those kind of things. And I think that it shows that he was able to confront these issues that you mentioned and didn't resolve them always the way he wanted to, but he tried to do it and recognize what the problems were. In the back.
Here?
Yes.
When I read the Prince book, I remember when Thorpe B. Isaacson and Alvin R. Dyer were made counselors to the first presidency, and I just wondered what a day would have been like in that time. But I wonder if you could just comment a little bit more, because I can't remember. How did that kind of come about? Who maneuvered that? Was Claire Middlemiss involved in that, or you know?
They got to buy the book to find out, don't they, Kurt?
Yeah, I think so.
No, as you recall, at the time I remember this was caused a rift because you can't have more than 2 counselors. And, well, Thorby's an interesting case. As you know, he was called the first presidency and never could officiate, right, because he had a stroke. Was it 2 months in, 3 months in? And virtually could not speak. And this always bothered some people. Why would that happen? And this goes back to about being human. President McKay, like all of us, likes to be flattered. And Middlemiss loved to be flattered. And when Claire Middlemiss gets a box of Cummings chocolates and a fur coat for Christmas from Sterling Silver, Thorpe Isaacson, they get immediate audiences with the president whenever they want. and President Elder Lee said he was furious that he tried to get an appointment with President McKay, and it was a week out. But when Thorpe walked in the office, the door was open, go right on in. So Thorpe was a problem case, and the other case, Alvin R. Dyer, became a problem because he was not popular, because people knew about the Middlemiss connection, and they knew that he was rather aggressive and a take-charge guy. So it's no surprise that when President McKay dies in 1970, that Alvin R. Dyer is never put in the quorum and is never heard of anymore except the Church Historical Department. So the counselor situation, there was a big brouhaha over the words "in" and "to" the first presidency. And the thing that comes out in the diaries is that President Brown, who was conducting, was not in favor of "in." So when they got to do the sustainings, he said "to." And President McKay thought that was on purpose and a slight. And President Brown says, "I'm sorry, I know what I was thinking. Probably a 40 to slip," but he did it. And so that bothered President McKay that they fought over "in" and "to." He wanted to give him equal authority and power. So that was an issue that occurred. Of course, the previous issue about the motion of President Clark started that off. And so he had some issues with counselors and perception of that. Way in the back, you had a question.
Yeah, I've not read Prince's biography. He may have addressed my question, but my question is, based off of what you've done with the diaries, what have you learned about important distinctions between what President McKay thought about communism and what President Benson thought about it and the Birchers thought about it? Because we know that President McKay made it a matter of general conference addresses, the subject of communism, and there's like a pamphlet, official church statement coming from him. So what are some of the important distinctions between...
The question was, in the diary, how does President McKay address the issue of communism, Benson, and the Birch Society? How does he navigate that? And you'll find early in the diary where he says the 2 greatest evils in America today are Catholicism and communism. And I always thought that was strange about Catholicism, because his good friend Dwayne Hunt objected to the McConkie book on Catholicism. And I think President McKay was offended that he thought that the abbey put in Huntsville was just to bother him. It was done on purpose, which is now gone, right? He was always an ardent communist and anti-communist, right? Anti-communist. Excuse me. I'd like to say that yes, he.
It was Brigham Young that was the ardent communist.
There we go. Yeah, exactly. So, what's funny, the McCarthy hearings, initially, many of the church members were for that, except the delegation, Arthur Watkins, was really opposed to it. And President McKay got some instruction that this guy's not all we think he is, McCarthy. So he kind of backed off, but Benson never did ever back off. He thought McCarthy was always right. So President McKay had to make the decision to be anti-communist, but not go to the fringe that Benson went to. And in the diaries, you'll find that Benson tried to push it as far as he could and kept getting no's from President McKay. But his conference talks at times were political statements, not doctrinal topics. And people objected to that. And President McKay, I think, was unhappy with that. And President McKay's, one of his main themes was free agency. And he felt that communism was so antithetical that he couldn't give it any leeway at all. So that was one of President McKay's problems he couldn't resolve to Benson's satisfaction. And up until almost his death, they fought over how much involvement Benson should have in his right-wing politics. So it was an issue. And both President Brown and President Tanner were really opposed to that, and they kept the balance there as long as they were there. Got time for one more question?
Yeah.
There's another hand here in the... Yes?
I guess the early Christians kind of had the same thing, but Paul said that about general authority, we have treasures in earthen vessels. So that was Paul's approach. The apostles in his time were human.
Yeah, and President McKay really is human, and he shows signs that he really got it, that he wasn't that special, although he did have some vanities. And two of them were, according to his sons, he loved his long hair, and he loved to drive big cars and drive them fast. And those were two things that he loved. And he also, at times, liked to be lionized a little bit. And this comes out in some things. And this bothered, I think, President Brown. And President Brown's memoirs, he talks about that in a chapter, that he's afraid that too many of the brethren think that when they go somewhere, it's them and not the office that's being honored, and that's our big mistake. So, but I think President McKay was pretty well centered on who he was, and he didn't think he was really above the common foe, and I think he really thought he was a person who had frailties and problems, and some of them read the diaries, and other times he was crushed by his inability to in fact, in closing, I mean, he was always a friend to everyone and didn't have harsh words to say a lot. But the question occurred with Fawn Brody. He writes in his diary that he was at a family reunion in Ogden, or Huntsville, and she was there. And he didn't know what to do. He was trying to avoid her. And she came over with her husband. Says, I shook her hand, but I didn't feel good about her. And it wasn't so much the book she wrote, as she felt that her father, Thomas McKay, died an early death of heart problems because of what her daughter had caused his brother. So I think it's more offended that she caused his brother, Thomas, his early death than he did about the book on Joseph Smith. But at that time he said, I admit that was wrong. I shouldn't be that way, but he couldn't help it, which makes him fallible. Yes.